to feed the soul, but I can't do this all on my own. No, I know I'm no Superman.
Good afternoon, my name is Karina Arndt. We are doing an oral history review on Ray Smith. Good afternoon, Ray.
Good afternoon, Karina.
Thank you for helping me on my language arts project. When and where did you grow up?
I grew up in a little border town in Maine, right on the Canadian border, in 1917, during World War I, a long while ago.
What was going on in your country in which you grew up in?
Well, I don't remember World War I because I was just a baby, but I remember very well when I grew up. It was after World War I, and there was all kinds of things that was going on because we were coming out of a war. It was very exciting, and I was a very young man. But I remember mostly going to the old silent movies, and I learned to read by reading subtitles. I didn't learn to read the way you learned to read. I learned to read by paragraphs. I just look at it, so I learned very early on the game, and that was a lot of fun. And I remember the first address on a radio by President Calvin Coolidge. Radios had just started coming in then, so it was very, very old, but it was very interesting.
U.S. President, do you remember the most and why?
I remember all of the presidents very well, and it'd be very hard to pick out one particular president. I remember President Hoover very well because that was in the height of the Depression, and President Hoover got blamed for the Depression, and it gets too complicated to get into politics here. But then the World War II came along, and President Roosevelt was involved in that, so we all remember presidents that are involved in wars. And I remember him very well because they had a big tidal project in Maine to create energy out of the ocean's waters, where the tides go in 27 feet high. And they were going to build this huge dam. But President Hoover had been a Republican and started that project. But Maine voted for him, and when President Roosevelt came in, he killed that project because Maine had gone Republican. And so I remember him very well for killing the Passamaquoddy project. But then we got into the war, and so he was a war hero then, a war hero president, and I remember that.
What is the biggest difference between my life today as a 12-year-old and your life as a 12-year-old?
The biggest difference is in communication. In those days, there was no such thing as television. There were no such things as computers. So we depended upon play. We played with each other, outdoors, indoors. We had all kinds of games with each other. We didn't have such things as you have today.
As a 12-year-old, what was fun?
Well, mostly I lived near the water on the rivers. And we played in the rivers. We'd go down on the river drives and ride on the logs. And we'd get little boats and we'd ride and go up the lakes. And we'd go through the woods a lot. We played cowboy and Indians. And I had some Indian friends, but they liked to play the cowboys, and I liked to play the Indians. And yeah.
What changed in your life during the Depression?
It took place when I was in high school. And of course, when I got out of high school, I couldn't get work. No one could get work. Well, we got work, but I worked in the woods. I worked driving the logs down the rivers even when I was in high school, when they'd give us time off when it came time to drive the logs down. And we'd get work here and there just to get enough work to buy food. Now don't get me wrong, we weren't hungry. We always got enough food, but we didn't have steady work. There were no such things as wonderful jobs like McDonald's.
How much were the candy bars?
5 cents. My favorite was the Baby Ruth, but I'd get one maybe once a week at the most, if I was lucky to get one once a week, but that would depend if I could get enough work to make the money to get the candy bar. The most money I ever made until World War II came along was $1 a day. That was absolutely the most money I ever made in my life until I was, well, I think 22 years old.
What adventures have you had?
Well, all of life has been an adventure. I left Maine and I wandered all over, and I ended up finally in Alaska prospecting for gold, and that was pretty adventuresome. I think that was the best adventure I had was I was a young man, but I'd learned to fly an airplane, so I was a pilot. I had a lot of fun doing that.
What was the best invention you had?
Well, the best invention in my lifetime, of course, has been the computer chip. But the computer chip is what created television. It's what created modern communication. It's a thing that's made possible. Your iPod, your cell phone.
Tell me a little bit more about your life.
Well, I think my life changed from World War II as it did for most young people, because I spent 3.5 years in the Army. Young people without money didn't go to college. You didn't go. You were very lucky to get a high school education. That was considered equivalent to a college education today. So when I went to Alaska, I just prospected for gold. That was all I was interested in, finding gold. That was my way to get riches. And I couldn't find work. But one time when I was in Fairbanks, Alaska, I went out to a place that time was a little school just getting started. Today it's called the University of Alaska.
Thank you for helping me with my project.
You're very welcome, Karina. Good to talk.
I'm no Superman. Together. I'm no Superman. Someday we'll be together. Someday I'm no Superman.